by Council Members Alondra Cano, Andrew Johnson, Vice Chair of the Committee, and Jacob Fry. We're a quorum of the committee and we can conduct the city's business. We may be joined by other council members soon. There's 5 items on our agenda today. The first 3 items are consent items. The 4th item is a discussion item, and the 5th is a postponed item that's been referred to the committee, and I'm just going to leave it postponed so we won't be discussing that. So before we go to our discussion, I'll just take care of our 3 consent items, and if any committee member wants to pull something off, we can certainly discuss that and work on it. But if not, we'll just pass them all together. The first one is a request for proposals for our 3rd community solar garden development project. This would be authorizing an RFP for a solar garden with services to be provided to the city of Minneapolis. That includes 5 criteria, including potential cost savings to the city of Minneapolis, workforce participation for Minneapolis residents in compliance with the small and underutilized business program goals, potential ownership by the city of Minneapolis of the renewable energy credits, community solar garden up to 1 megawatts in size, and also requiring the garden developer to assign 20% of the garden generation to Minneapolis low-income households and enter into subscription agreements with such households. That's last item is maybe the newest twist on this one. The second item is authorizing a 5-year license agreement with the public schools to use space in multiple school sites for providing services to the general public in the case of public health emergencies. And the third consent item is accepting a grant from Ian Selmerhalder Foundation for Minneapolis Animal Care and Control. This would cover a portion of the medical costs of animal care at the facility. Would anyone like to pull it to discuss any of those items? Seeing none, then I'll move all 3 items. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Those items are approved. Now we'll move on to our 4th item. This is somewhat of a continuation of last committee meeting where we discussed some of the results of some health inspections of businesses that hold adult entertainment licenses. Today we're going to be getting a report from researchers at the University of Minnesota. I'm going to let our Director of Environmental Health, Daniel Huff, kind of tee that up for us. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Dan Huff. I'm the Environmental Health Director with the city's Health Department. As Chair Gordon mentioned, this is a follow-up from our last presentation 2 weeks ago. We have been working with the University of Minnesota UROC, Dr. Lauren Martin, who has done research for us to look at what are the workplace experiences of folks who are working in some of our adult entertainment establishments. Our concern here is to look at what are the health and safety issues that are faced by these workers as we look to ensure that all workers in Minneapolis are working in safe, healthy places. And I think we often can overlook folks who are working in some businesses that perhaps we don't think about as often. But it's important to remember that being an entertainer is a legal occupation, and therefore folks deserve the same workplace protections as any other worker. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Lauren Martin, and she and her team will be giving our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Martin. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I want to extend a thank you on behalf of our whole team for the opportunity to present our findings to you today. Again, my name is Lauren Martin, and I'm the Director of Research at the Urban Research Outreach Engagement Center, or UROC, at the University of Minnesota. This study was funded by the Minneapolis Health Department and also the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. The purpose of our report was really to better understand the workplace experiences of people who perform in Minneapolis strip clubs. We use the term entertainer, which we learned from our community advisory group and others is a respectful and industry standard term for referring to people who perform in strip club environments. Really what we wanted to do was gain insights from the perspective of entertainers about their workplace, particularly health and safety aspects of their experiences at work. I want to emphasize that we believe entertainers are experts in their experiences and that they have really great and creative solutions for any challenges that they tell us about. So today what I'm going to do with the help of some of our team members is to give you a high-level overview of our report. I'm going to cover 6 points. First, we're going to start with a little bit of methods, just so you get a sense on how we did the project. Then I'm going to ask a colleague of mine to talk about some background information. Then we'll present information about entertainer-identified challenges in their workplace. We'll share some of the solutions that entertainers talked about for those challenges. And then we'll invite some of our community advisory group to come and share a little bit about their experience working on the project. And then we'll wrap up, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them at that point. I also want to note that there is some explicit language in the presentation. We'll be reading some quotes, and we're talking about workplace environments, so I'm just going to be using clear and direct language to talk about that. Long story short, our report identified a number of workplace concerns, which we're going to tell you about here in a second. But I want to start with, oops, sorry, my presentation went to sleep. One moment. I want to start with a quote, which you'll be able to see in a moment. The quote that I want to share to frame the presentation really sums up what a lot of entertainers talked about, how they feel about the project. Should I just go ahead and read that quote while Dan is pulling up the PowerPoint? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to read the quote for you. So, as a society, too, I feel like strippers are like there's a big judgment. And so why take care of that? Referring to the workplace. Because they deserve to be in a shitty work environment, because you wouldn't be there if you were a good person, which is BS. Essentially what this person is saying is there's a lack of care and concern for the workplace safety of entertainers. So just a little bit about the study. This was an exploratory study that really sought a breadth and depth of insider knowledge to surface key themes to develop and guide insights for policy development. Erotic dancing is generally stigmatized and often denigrated, so this presents specific and unique challenges for doing research, as people disclosing being part of that industry that might harm future job prospects. So we really needed to be very careful about how we did this project. So given all of this, we wanted to create a research process that was respectful and based on dignity, transparency, and safety. So we used an action research approach, which engages the people who are part of the study in the design of the study. And so we have, the first thing we did was to develop a community advisory group that really would bring different expertise to the table to make sure that we were doing the project respectfully and accurately. So now at this point I want to invite Christina Melander to come up. She's our lead researcher on the project, and I want her to share a little bit for you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and thank you for hearing a presentation today. I'm Christina Melander, and I'm a research fellow at UROC, also the lead researcher on this project. So again, this is a mixed method study. We did 24 confidential interviews with industry stakeholders. The majority of those people that we interviewed were current and former entertainers. Excellent. We also conducted an online and anonymous survey because we know that not everyone wants to do a face-to-face interview. The majority of the survey participants were current and recent entertainers from racially diverse backgrounds. We have a team of 4 researchers, all of whom have a background in doing direct service with marginalized populations and research expertise. We transcribed all interview data coded using constant comparative analysis through a qualitative software called In Vivo. Survey data was cleaned and analyzed using SPSS. Between both the interviews and the surveys, we learned about workplace conditions in all of the Minneapolis strip clubs, and we were able to engage people across demographics, including race and age. Again, this is an exploratory study, and more in-depth research is needed to continue to explore these themes in depth. Just want to give a little bit of background. Not everyone's familiar with this industry. So strip clubs are regulated as part of a business license for adult entertainment establishments, of which there are 17 in Minneapolis. 14 of these offer live nude or semi-nude performances, also referred to as erotic dancing, and then 10 of them are strip clubs or gentlemen's clubs. We focused on these 10 strip clubs. In general, strip clubs have 3 performance spaces. They have a stage that may or may not contain a pole, where entertainers dance and remove some or all of their clothing and receive tips directly from customers. There's open seating areas for the customers where entertainers perform lap dances and can also involve like a sexy performance as well. And then finally, VIP spaces, which are semi-private areas that are offset from the main stage and offset from the open seating area. And then customers usually pay by an increment of a half hour or an hour for time with an entertainer within a VIP space. A little bit more background about entertainers themselves. So the vast majority of entertainers within Minneapolis are not technically employees of strip clubs, rather they are independent contractors, which means that they don't have a guaranteed wage, workers' compensation, sick time, benefits, or guarantee of work. Our research indicates that a majority of the entertainers at Minneapolis strip clubs do identify as women, or their stage persona is femme. Our participants said that they chose to work in strip clubs for a variety of reasons. There's often flexible work schedules, high earning potential, and quick money. They can do it while they're a student in school, have a second job, are parenting, and others enjoy being sexy and like the fun and lively atmosphere of strip clubs. For some entertainers, it's a job that they can get and make enough to support themselves and their families, which is especially important for women and others living in poverty. Pay does vary greatly across clubs and shift times. Some entertainers make more money or less depending on if they're doing lap dances or VIP time, among numerous other reasons. It's impossible to know exactly how many entertainers are working in Minneapolis, given that they're independent contractors and that there is no employment database for this industry. And based on our interviews, we estimate that there's approximately 200 entertainers that are working on a weekend night in Minneapolis. And just a little bit more about what an entertainer does as part of their primary work or job duties. So entertainers receive money from customers or from hosts or managers who are facilitating financial transactions between the entertainers and customers through credit cards or dance dollars. Entertainers earn money in a variety of different ways. For example, the stage performances are often for the purposes of advertising or marketing oneself for a later individual dance, lap dance, or VIP experience. Our data also shows that entertainers earn the most revenue through VIP experiences. It's important to note that clubs typically set the prices of the lap dance and the VIP rooms. And as I previously mentioned, the VIP rooms are kind of the semi-private, semi-secluded areas that may contain booths or partitioned off couches or beds where an entertainer can spend alone time with a customer. And then in addition to the dancing and the performances, entertainers also provide an individualized attention to customers. They may be expected to upsell or encourage alcohol sales, clean poles, or to encourage the tipping by customers to other strip club staff. And with that, I'm going to pass this off to Lauren for key findings.
Thank you, Christina. We're going to move into some of our key findings. Know that the report has a great deal more detail on each of these findings, so I'm just going to give you some high-level overview. We identified 3 primary areas of concern that workers told us about. The first is training and lack of clarity around workplace expectations. The second is revolves around customer behavior, particularly in the VIP spaces. And the third were some areas around club management. All right, the first one. In the interviews and in surveys, entertainers really talked a lot about lack of kind of basic training about what the job duties entail. That includes things like how to stay safe while performing their jobs, things around, they reported a lot of workplace injuries, so twisting of ankles, bruised ribs, falling, torn nails, things like that. And they believed that many of these workplace injuries could be preventable with additional training. It's also important to bear in mind, as Christina mentioned, entertainers are independent contractors, so if they are injured on the job, they have no access to workers' comp or sick time or time off. We also learned that entertainers may be exposed to a variety of bodily fluids as a part of their job, which include vomit, urine, and semen. And most of the people that we interviewed reported that there were no kind of cleanup protocols in place that they knew of, or easy ways to access appropriate cleansers and such to take care of those bodily fluids. Our study participants did not report that they engaged in any sex acts in the clubs, but I think it's important to note that they described that sometimes customers ejaculate in the club, and that this is often unwanted. Not often, it is unwanted, and it was not meant to be part of the performance that was offered. So because sex acts are illegal, there's kind of a taboo in the clubs for workers to share if an ejaculation does happen. So that just puts some difficulty around making sure that that bodily fluid is taken care of appropriately in terms of cleanup. Additionally, alcohol consumption can be a safety hazard. So as Christina mentioned, part of the job duties can involve upselling for champagne and other alcohol for entertainers who are over 21 and in the clubs that sell alcohol. So they're encouraged to sometimes drink with customers. So that can create some hazards. And they also talked a lot about the hazards created by customers who are intoxicated. In terms of workplace concerns around customer behavior, it should be noted that most of the customers are predominantly men, although there are some exceptions. Entertainers expressed many instances of verbal harassment and derogatory language directed at them. They also described some incidents of physical assault that occurred from customers, including slapping, hitting, groping, restraining, and choking. Sometimes this sexual harassment and sexual assault would include or can include frequent requests for sexual acts, so kind of a asking for more. And then that could sometimes lead to unwanted and sometimes forced sexual contact with the customers. Many of these instances occurred within VIP spaces where entertainers experience that the majority of customers in their experience have expectations of receiving some kind of additional sexual touching or sexual contact from entertainers. So this is coming from the customers. And they also reported that they feel some pressure, economic pressure and psychological pressure to do more in order to make more money for themselves and the club. Another point, many of the entertainers said that they don't always feel supported by management and bouncers in these spaces, unless the assault is particularly egregious. So according to our data, these concerns about customer behavior, namely the assault and pressure for commercial sex trading, are made worse in some clubs by the way those clubs are managed. I want to note there is a variety of experiences across clubs. So an important point is that entertainers pay out a significant amount of their total earnings in tips, house fees, and fines. And they are tipping pretty much all of the club staff, including paid employees of the club. That includes managers and bouncers, servers, wait staff, etc. So because of these tipping and fines, entertainers often feel pressure to try to earn more money so that they don't leave work without actually earning money.
So I'm trying really hard not to interrupt.
That's okay.
I've given up now.
Go ahead.
So who's controlling those tips then? And is there a percentage of tips, or is there a fee that they're supposed to pay to the bouncer and to the manager, so they have to hit a minimum out of the tips, or is it a percentage? And isn't the tip under the control of the person getting tipped? It just seems like a really complicated and unclear business model. But maybe you can just tell me a little bit just on this question of the tips Is it a percentage? Is there some kind
Sure.
of amount?
So there's different ways that entertainers pay. So they pay a house fee, which is essentially like working in a hairdressing salon where you pay to have a chair. So you pay to work at the club, and then the tips are not part of the contract, but it's kind of industry-wide standard. And the tipping is really meant to, it's important. A lot of times entertainers feel pressure to tip managers and others because then the managers help direct them to particular customers. They kind of have a lot of control over the workplace environment. So there's a feeling of obligation to tip to managers. It's not required, but if someone doesn't tip, they might not have as pleasant a work experience as they might have had they tipped more. And fees, those are for things like coming late to a shift, dress code violations, other things like that. It's complex, and it does vary by club. So different clubs have different rules. There's also whatever services the entertainer is providing, so lap dances or VIP experience. Sometimes, some clubs, it's a tip from that, but other times it's a commission. So whatever the portion of what that service would cost, the management would take a portion of that. But it is complicated, and it does vary by club. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And just
Okay.
to be clear, so every entertainer has a written contract that they sign with the management?
They're independent contractors. Yep. Okay, so I think I've covered this. Any other questions on that before I move on?
Well,
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Should I move on and we can?
is it on tipping? Why don't you ask one more question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you just give us a little bit more detail on how the financial piece works with, so the charges that are charged for each, so like the schedule of payment to the club and to the entertainer? So like, is it on a biweekly basis? I'm just trying to understand kind of how the tipping versus is the club paying their employees on a regular schedule under their contract, or is it like nightly, or how that works?
So I should be really clear. Our study wasn't actually about the financial arrangements that happen in strip clubs. So I don't want to venture too far into that territory because that wasn't one of our research questions. Rather, our focus was really on health and safety. So this information about tipping and commissions and house fees really came up as part of entertainers' discussion about safety and pressure to do more for less. So I don't want to go too far out on a limb, and because that wasn't really the purpose of our study. So we learned some things, but does that make sense?
Fair enough. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think it was, I appreciate you bringing it up in the way that it is tied to how employees feel protected or not in the workplace. So I think we can follow up on that more later.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, to speak authoritatively around that issue, we would have had to ask different questions. We would have had to investigate different data sets. So at this point, I think the main point that the people who we interviewed in the surveys is that this pressure for tipping, house fees, commissions, etc., just it eats into what a person is able to earn as part of their shift, and therefore, in order to make the money that they need to make or that they thought they were going to make on their shift, they might engage in more VIP work in order to make more money for themselves. So it's pushing people into an arena where they're in a higher risk situation for sexual assault. Does that make sense? I think that's the main point we're trying to get across in our report related to the financial stuff. So should I continue?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So then I want to talk a little bit about commercial sex trading. As I mentioned, a lot of entertainers do feel pressure to engage in sex acts from some customers. I want to be really, really clear, though. None of the current entertainers who participated in our study said that they themselves had engaged in sex acts. So they were talking about the general atmosphere of the club. They did talk a lot about the pressure kind of being there. And they also mentioned that the reaction from the club to this can vary significantly. So different clubs have different ways of dealing with this pressure for sex acts. Some clubs have a clear kind of no tolerance policy. Some are maybe turning a little bit of a blind eye, and other clubs or managers might even be involved in helping to facilitate some of that. Again, there's a wide range and a wide variation, but there is a structural issue. The VIP spaces inherently promote a vagueness or a blurred lines between erotic dancing as performance and sex acts. So the allure for the customer is that they're going to pay more time or they're going to pay more money for time spent with an entertainer in a private space, so that the people we interviewed feel that customers therefore come into that VIP space perhaps with different expectations. And they felt that by and large, they were, as entertainers, they were required to kind of police those boundaries and set that interactional tone with the customer.
So is there a button that they can push, or how would they get help from and are they called bouncers or the security? Do they get help? Do they have to scream? How's support do they get support when they need it?
So my understanding is it varies by club. Some clubs have security cameras, some clubs don't. Certainly there are managers or bouncers present in the VIP areas. Some clubs have more bouncers or managers, some clubs have less. So I believe it's up to the entertainer to signal to the bouncer or management that they're in need of assistance.
Okay.
And that we can see if anyone else wants to add to that question later in the presentation. Any other questions about that? This is again where tipping comes in, right? So if you're tipping bouncers and managers, they might be more aware that you're in the VIP space, and they might be more attentive to your needs. Let me see where. I also want to say most of the entertainers that we interviewed, or the entertainers that we talked with, said that most entertainers are not engaging in sex acts, but our participants believe that there are some who are, and that creates a kind of customer expectation. So if a customer goes with someone who does do something a little over the line, that creates and builds in an expectation from customers that all entertainers might do that as well. One of the research questions, or one of the secondary focus that we had on this project was just to ask about trafficking in the clubs. So just a couple notes on that. First, technically human trafficking in a strip club would be considered labor trafficking because strip clubs are a legal business. However, if sex trading or sex acts were occurring, then that could overlap with aspects of sex trafficking as well. Overall, the participants in our study identified few instances that they thought were instances of sex trafficking. And some of the pathways that they saw around sex trafficking were resulting from domestic violence, where the person's romantic partner might be a pimp or trafficker. So that was kind of the main thing that entertainers talked about when asked about trafficking. Our participants also described a few instances where they believed that someone in the strip club had facilitated commercial sex or a sex act, and that technically would meet a definition for the Minnesota statute for trafficking. Another point is that sometimes pimps or traffickers might use a strip club as a place for recruitment. So they might come to a club as a customer and be in the club environment and then interact with the entertainers. Should also note that other research we've done has highlighted many other places where pimps and traffickers recruit for sex trafficking. And finally, the entertainers that we spoke to did not feel that, didn't really see minors under the age of 18 working in strip clubs at this time. So they felt that wasn't a problem anymore, but that it might have been more of a problem in the past. So with that, I want to turn it over to Christina Melander again, who's going to share some of the entertainer ideas about how to deal with some of these workplace challenges.
Hi, thank you again. So this research is using a solution-focused approach, which engages the research participants in imagining and envisioning the elimination of the barriers or the concerns that they have defined for themselves. We believe that entertainers are experts of their own experiences and their workplace, and therefore policy solutions should be grounded in the elements and ideas that entertainers have for improving their workplace. So I'm just going to present a few solution ideas. Our full report has even more. Some of these solutions may have policy implications, such as through licensing or ordinance, while other solutions are directed towards the management and operational practices of clubs. So related to job expectations, entertainers discussed creating new staff training and orientations, including injury prevention, dress codes, and safety strategies for interacting with customers. Entertainers also believed that accountability and limitations around alcohol consumption for both entertainers and customers would promote safety. Finally, entertainers believed that promoting leadership of entertainers into management positions would be beneficial to the industry overall. As Lauren mentioned earlier, verbal harassment, physical assault, sexual harassment, and sexual assault are pervasive and endemic issues that entertainers face on a daily basis. To address these issues, entertainers believed that VIP spaces in particular needed to be reconfigured, which could include making them more open, increased surveillance, or reconfiguring the business operational model of VIP spaces altogether. Entertainers want to be heard, validated, and supported by management if they do experience an assault or harassment. They also asked for stricter enforcement of the customer behavior. Entertainers recommended more regulated standards for entertainer-customer interactions so that entertainers are not left fending for themselves in order to establish and enforce the boundaries. And again, our full report has more in-depth solutions as well. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up this portion, and then I'm going to invite a couple members of our community advisory group to also share some thoughts. So first of all, or in conclusion, I should say, according to our data, entertainers have a variety of reasons that they choose to work in strip clubs, and many enjoy their work. We did identify some pretty significant health and safety concerns that are faced by entertainers.